The only thing we have to
Beer.
is
Beer.
itself.
Beer. So many choices.
Only no function beer well without.
Woohoo! Beer!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Beer Busters. We're going to bring you the news and reviews of your favorite brews. I am Wayne Baker, and I am joined by my co-host and brewologist,
Steph Heffner.
And you will notice that mine is not the voice you normally hear at the top of the episode. Unfortunately, Dan is unable to join us for this recording. I'm going to do my best to kind of fill in for his duties. So apologies if I don't perform to the same standards you're used to. But I think you're still going to really enjoy this episode. We have some exciting things going on. We have joining us James Warner from City State Brewing. How's it going, James?
Hey, everybody. I'm going to hit that mute button. I'm doing great. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to get all into everything City State in just a moment, but we do have to do our usual housekeeping. Remember, you can keep up with all of our goings on the internet. We are at Beer Busters on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, correct? At Beer Busters, I believe. Yes, I don't pay attention to TikTok. We are Beer Busters Podcast on Facebook. You can go to beerbusterspodcast.com. You can add /shop to that URL, get some cool merch. We have a YouTube channel. We are Beer Busters Podcast on there. And of course, there's patreon.com/beerbusters, where you can become a patron of the podcast for as little as $1 a month and get cool behind the scenes bonus content. Now, the amount of content has varied lately, and I apologize to our patrons. Our recordings have been a little off kilter and we haven't always done last call, but there's always cool stuff coming. There's always cool archives, and we are going to engage with more bonus content on Patreon, I promise. But with all of that, I'm sorry.
We recorded some pretty kick-ass bonus content last night.
We did actually. We had a sort of random conversation for like an hour or so, and we're going to edit that and put it on Patreon. It's a little bonus behind the scenes. Not a lot of beer talk, but we talked a lot about some other stuff, which was pretty cool and pretty fun. But enough about us. Let's talk about James and City State Brewing in Washington, D.C. James, thanks again for joining us. Now, I know you guys have only been open since 2021 June. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. We opened our doors on June 4th, 2021, after about 7 years of work getting it open, and we are still here. A year later, we had our first anniversary last month, and yeah,
Awesome.
it's been a very interesting year to be open.
I'm sure it has. And I do want to talk about that a little bit in our little COVID corner segment that we always have, especially with breweries that have opened recently. But I want to talk about that 7 years and before, and what kind of led to the idea for City State Brewing, and what was your sort of experience with beer beforehand?
I've lived in DC since 2004, and I came to DC from New York City. I'd been in the Peace Corps, and then came to DC to work on politics and policy. I was interested in environmental policy and so forth. And I had the experience of living in DC and feeling that there were a lot of people who didn't really have a connection to the city. People came to work on something that they were passionate about, but didn't necessarily have a connection to the city. And so we're sort of transient, and you make friends with people and they'd move to the West Coast. And coming from Manhattan, where people are very fierce about knowing New York City history, and especially when people move to New York, people really call themselves New Yorkers right away. Whereas someone will be living in DC for 20 years and you ask them where they're from and they'll say Ohio. So I thought, seriously, I've met more people from Ohio and Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, and the Peace Corps, and then moving to DC than I ever had in my life, which is a wonderful thing. But it because people's time in the city is initially linked to a job, and then they sort of find themselves 5 years later still there, putting down roots, meeting somebody. but there's not the same sort of I don't know, I guess kind of like cultural infrastructure in a way, or at least it wasn't when I moved to DC in 2006. It's a city where some of the greatest struggles of for human rights, for civil rights have taken place in this country. But a lot of what has happened there, and the people, what the people live there have gone through, is sort of invisible. And I just saw that there was a potential in DC for more hometown brands. I had started home brewing at home. I was always really interested in beer. I don't really know why. When I was like 8 or 9 years old, my parents gave me a Caliber, it was a non-alcoholic beer, one summer, and I really liked it. And so it was like it became my soft drink. And I got like I would take it, like school picnics, and I got a very worried letter home, one day. But I just liked it. It's like goes so good with fried chicken. And I can tell you, like my baby daughter, she's a year and a half. We were at somebody's house who doesn't drink, and they had Athletic IPA, and so I thought it's not alcoholic. Just like let the baby taste it, and she tasted it, and then when I went to pull the can away, she grabbed it with both hands, pulled it towards her, and chugged the rest of the can. My wife, look at my wife's face. I said, "Don't worry." She's like, she can't buy her own drinks. Like she won't ever have it again. But she definitely wants, when you open anything, she wants to taste it. But yeah, so look, people have been drinking beer kids have been drinking beer for thousands of years. That's for sure, of one kind or another. So so I like the taste of it. And I ended up going to college in Scotland for a couple of different reasons. I went to college at the University of St. Andrews. And, and I wasn't a big drinker when I was in high school. I was, wasn't the most socially adept in the whole world. And so I didn't have a fake ID or anything. And so when we would go out to the one or two bars that, would serve me and my guy friends, because it wasn't that cool to be hanging out with a group of girls. I for some reason, I wanted a Guinness. Like they're all getting pictures of Bud Light, and I just thought it should taste good, whatever you're drinking. I swear, yeah. I just but no one wanted a picture of Bud Light, so I got so that no one wanted a picture of Guinness. So when it was my turn to buy the round, so maybe that was defensive. But so I went to college overseas. I went to college in Scotland, and really learned so much about beer and whiskey there, especially beer. There was a small bar. St. Andrews has about 4 streets and over 40 drinking establishments, and there was a place called the Cellar Bar, and it had real ale. And the guy who ran it, Malcolm, would go and get their beers would come in from around the UK. Small breweries, and there would be real ale, and there was everywhere was ale pulled out of the hand pump, and it was just a completely different thing than anything experienced in the US, and it's just beautiful. And remember, the alcohol strengths were way different. So we're talking like 94, 95. The alcohol strengths were way different too. I mean, remember there's Theakston's Old Peculiar. It was 5% beer. It's going to get you wasted, right? You get a pint of 5%. There's IPAs, the Duker's IPA that they make in Edinburgh. It's 3.5%. So wow. It was. You do your homework in the pub. You gather with because the pub is a gathering place. It's about being convivial and sociable, and of course there was a lot of other drinking that went on. But you could definitely be a student there and have a normal life. There was sort of being in the pubs, And so I learned more about and really sort of fell in love with British beer. Met brewing students at Harriet Watt University, and then went home. I lived in Edinburgh for a summer, and it's like 3 or 4 breweries in Edinburgh, and so they're all going. The smell through the whole town. And then I went home, and there was none of that. There was just you couldn't. It was like Pete's Wicked Ale. You couldn't get anything. It was like the whole culture was non-existent. And there was a couple of places. There was a place called the Blind Tiger in New York, which is a different spot than it's in now. And that was one of the only places that you could get cask ale. I mean, it was a place called DBA also on the Lower East Side. And so I just always had this love and interest for beer. And when I came to DC, I found myself living in a house with enough space with a buddy of mine who was interested in it too. And of course, it always starts the same way. Hey, we could save money by making our own beer.
That's not true.
Don't believe it, kids.
Right. Yeah. This is, after we opened the brewery, my friend says he definitely got the better of that deal. But we went and got homebrew equipment and made a saison, and we fermented on the porch in the summer, and had to like stick our arms in it because like the grommet that held the hydrometer dropped in, or held the airlock dropped in, so we called it like broad door, like the golden arm. And we said, hey, we can make something better than Budweiser on a porch. And it was a saison, and it was delicious. And I was really captivated by the process. There's something I always loved cooking. And I had been, so I lived in the Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps, so used to doing a lot of cooking for myself, and not necessarily like 30-minute gourmet, like longer food projects. I always loved, and there was just something so compelling about making a batch of beer. It was, you had to stay focused on, and committed to it from start to finish. It was cooking and science and chemistry and biology, so much information, and then so much information out there to learn. And it was really, it just sort of sucked me in. And so, my best friend said, like, you have to keep this equipment in your house, because every week I was like, hey, let's make another batch. And hey, let's make another batch. And, I started, homebrewing a lot of beer. I was working on climate change policy for the Pew Center on Global Climate Change. And when I wasn't working, I was sort of planning the next homebrew batch, and I had dinners, paired courses, and it was really great. I look back on my posts at Homebrew Talk now, they're still up. And the questions I was asking, like, I don't even know where that was. Like, I was so deep in it, and so deep in learning, and in learning from all the people that were online, that were helping, folks learn how to homebrew. And so that was like 2008, 2009. And remember, that was you might not remember, there was a hop shortage then.
Mm-hmm.
It was so it was the things that people were learning to brew, that, the newbies went through, and the recipes that people were asking for critiques from were like radically different from what it is now, which I think is a lot like, for my first brew, please critique my mint chocolate peanut butter 12% porter. Like, what strain of yeast should I, what's the best crystal malt for that? Like, no, there was a hop shortage, and people were really still focused on kind of classic styles approach. Of learning how to whether you're doing extract or all grain, to start from the basics and build up from there. And there was a friend of mine who worked for NPR, and he interviewed me and about making your own beer or for St. Patrick's Day, and he just like left the the mic going while I just talked about all the things I'd been learning, and he kind of used the sort of drone of my voice as the background in the piece. So I really, I was just, I loved it, but it was sort of a hobby. But then DC Brow opened in 2011, and they did so much to get open and to sort of to because the city is sort of regulatory in a regulatory sense. It hadn't been a brewery for 50 years. So it was a really cool, it was a fascinating thing that they did. And, then clearly, sort of prepare the ground for others. And as I was moving, through my 30s and thinking about what I wanted the rest of my career to be like, I had continued. I went to work in the Senate, and then the senator I worked for lost, and so I was sort of out in the DC world of. It was in 2010 when that happened, so no one was hiring Democrats. No one was hiring Democrats who worked on climate change, really. So as I then had more free time, the brewing really took over. My interest in brewing really took over and hard, and I started having this idea. I mean, obviously DC Brow had led the way, and I was sort of watching. I wonder, is there room for another one? Like they got there first. Is there room for another one? Then 3 Stars open. Is there room for more? And I felt that there was. They're great, great people, and the beer that they were making was great, but it was, if you go to Amsterdam or the UK, anywhere, any city in Europe, there's multiple breweries. So clearly there was more room. And I, as I said, I was having this experience of, wanting to push against the sort of transient nature of DC and wanting to dig into it a little bit more. And I thought that DC could really use another hometown brand. And so this idea for a brewery in DC that was really focused on the history and culture of the district, of the people who live here, not the Capitol Dome and the monuments and, about stuff about the government, but about the history and culture of the district, took hold, and the idea jumped into my head. And that was around 2012, 2013. And then in 2014, I got in 2013, I got an apprenticeship at a small brewery in Polson, Montana, called Glacier Brewing. I think he sold it because I went on Pro Brewer and said, I'll go anywhere for a month. I was changing jobs. So I'll go anywhere for a month and work in your brewery, do anything you want. And this guy in Montana took me up on it because I wanted to see, starting to work on the business plan, but I really had to see if there was physically something that I wanted to do, and if it was a life I wanted to live.
Yeah.
To really see physically what it was to run a brewery. And it was a beautiful, small place, small town, but it was a beautiful experience. He was very, Dave Ayers, his name, was very keen on teaching people, and he was, he had a young daughter, and it was very much like a family business. You could really see that it could be a lovely life as well as a creative enterprise. I come from a long line of artists and sort of creative entrepreneurs. My father was a musician, and that whole line was his whole side of the family. He wrote music for commercials for a lot of his career, and my mother worked in publishing and sort of is very visual. So this sort of connection with advertising and with sort of visual culture that is a very important part of brewing. It was a very fertile place for me, and this idea of the brand and of City State, I could just feel it. There was something alive to it. So in 2014, I left government, and I started working as a waiter at Church Key, which is a very famous beer bar, a restaurant in DC. Really, fascinating place. One of the first places to pair like fine dining with beer. It's amazing. That concept hasn't really caught on around the country. It was a really revolutionary thing that they did. And I had worked in restaurants before, after grad school and stuff at times, but I'd never been a waiter before. And those of you out there, age 39 is not like the best time to be a waiter for the first time. You just, there's just a lot of, I was great at, I knew a lot about beer and I was great at selling it. I was not a great waiter. And so they let me go, and but I was able to they were able to connect me to a distributorship, Legends Distributing. And so I went to work as a beer salesman for 5 years. At the time I didn't know it was going to be 5 years, but I went out and was raising money for the brewery. And while I was doing that, I had to really be fully committed. If you're going to try to do something like this, I'd never run a business before. I wasn't someone who would sold a tech company and could just throw a bunch of money at it. And I went and worked as a craft beer salesman, and it's the thing about making beer. It's a lot of fun to make. Whether if you're a home brewer, you got to package it someday. And a brewery, it's great if you're making it. You have to sell it. You have to know how it's going to be sold. So I was brewing at home, and I would and I started getting intellectual property, trademarks and stuff on a core range of beers that I could build a business plan and a sort of cash flow model around. Got some label art done. We hired a branding person, or art director, and would have I got a 15-gallon sort of homebrew system that was a Brickman Tower of Power. So it's very repeatable. So recirculating mass systems, great. And so I could invite people over and pitch them and pitch them on investing in the brewery, or take a jockey box to places and do like a little road show. And over the course of 5 years, I raised about $500,000 doing that. Generally $10,000, $15,000 at a time. Finally raised enough to sign a lease, and that was in 2019, September 2019. Signed the lease after a long time looking. Got the word that the lease had been signed when I was in a small rural village in Belgium. I'd won an incentive through Legends for a trip to Belgium, which is the second one I won. It was amazing. It's, the St. Bernardus D&V importers took such incredible good care of us, and it was an amazing trip. So I found out that I'd signed the lease there, and then in January, told Legends I was leaving, and so at the end of January, I got married on my birthday. We were planning to get married, but I was losing my health insurance. So my wife and I got married at City Hall. We were planning a bigger wedding in person later that year in 2020. And
what happened?
February 2020, I quit. I left. I got a couple of suits made, not full bespoke, but because and at Suit Supply, they were terrific. Knew I had about $500,000 more to raise. We'd signed the lease, and that was February 2020. In fact, raised $100,000 in February 2020, and then March happened.
Yeah, and then we all know what happened next.
Yeah. Oh well, I don't know what happened with you. It's a wonderful thing, actually, right? Like, it's terrible, obviously, COVID, but you'll never be stuck for a small talk with anybody again, like all over the world. You can only say it's like what you do. How is it for you, right? So I was in my house, and still had about $400,000 left to raise, and the construction was starting, and had spent almost $200,000 on deposits for equipment and for the lease and for the construction work. And I thought, I've gone this far, can't stop now. And because I didn't have a backup plan. And but I just had to wait, because no bank would talk to me until all the PPP stuff was over. Couldn't qualify PPP because we weren't open and revenue generating business. And so that was July, until the banks would talk to you about anything other than PPP. And then they wouldn't talk to me because I was a food and beverage business. Yeah. Tried a lot of creative stuff. We're in an opportunity zone. So I started our own opportunity zone fund to try to get, basically we can give a tax break for capital gains investment. And just, dozens of banks talked, everybody I knew about, if you want to start a business, be prepared to ask everybody you know for money at least twice. I think that or running for office, same idea. It's like, or anything like this. And, people understand, but, I didn't know what else to do. I had hundreds of thousands of dollars to raise, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And finally started found a bank in DC, community bank. There's banks that are called CDFIs, which I think it's a community directed financial institutions. And their mission is, their charters are to take risks that, bigger banks won't, for something that may have community benefit.
Right. Yeah.
So I was a Wells Fargo customer, I'd been a Wachovia customer. I was a Wells Fargo customer. When I asked them for a loan, they said, well, here's the problem. You've raised, but you have investors. You've raised, $600,000. You've got 50 investors. You have a lease. You have a deposit on the equipment. And so all of those factors mean that we can't give you a loan. So wait, I've done like this. This actually exists. Like we have a location. They broke. Yes, but if we're going to take on something like this, they said, and a lot of banks are this way. Like we want to have control of it from the start. And or others said, well, you've put all this in, but if you don't get more money, it's going to go under. So why should we want to get involved? Plus, don't you know there's a pandemic on? And I had to reiterate what the business plan was: is that we weren't a restaurant. It's a wholesale business that didn't only depend on one sector, right? And then people were drinking beer at home, and that was it. But it just what a brewery is, what it can be, and how people aren't paying that close attention. You don't find that many banks who really know what's involved. I had to educate my bank on what a brewery was from start to finish, and you do that a lot when you're starting a company. So we got our loan at the end of December, really like at the very end of the year. And I've heard a lot of stories from other entrepreneurs too. It's like you can't ever give up. You can't ever, because sometimes it's like, you're about to run out of money and the other check arrives like just that day. And that's kind of how it was. We owed money to the contractor and they were waiting, and, it was a complicated loan to bring off in some ways, because we were using as collateral equipment that hadn't arrived yet, but that we'd already put a deposit on. And it really, the most amazing thing to me about it all is that we carried it off without a single Zoom meeting or in person. It was all over the phone. It was all over the phone and emails. Yeah, we never had a single. Some of these, these bank officers who were like, to change my life, I don't know what they look like. Still, to this day, it was a very old-fashioned, way of doing things, and it relied in the end, just my unwillingness to stop. And to I knew that this was going to be something great, and just tried to pull everyone along with me, and we were able to open in, as I said, in June of we got done at the end of December 2020, and then there were a lot of other exciting things that happened in 2021, like getting the boiler approved was one of the most. There's two boiler inspectors in all of DC, and when you get two inspectors of any kind, it's just like human psychology. What's going to happen? They're like petty tyrants. It was like something out of a Russian novel. Like we were waiting for them to ask for a bribe. It would have made it so much easier. Like graft is kind of like an equalizer in some ways. Like, this guy, like they held us up from getting open for like at least 6 weeks. We had to get like deputy mayor's office involved. It was crazy. But because DC is not Portland, Oregon, we were the 6th production brewery, I think, to ever open. So there still wasn't, that should be enough, but it wasn't. So, the closest thing they have regulations for in the books in DC is just like ice cream manufacturing. So right. So like I talked to some people like, yeah, we did DC Brow, like the Department of Health. We did DC Brow. We didn't really have like a code in place then. And I guess we still don't now, because what you actually
10 years later.
Yeah. The last mile, of all the final inspections and everything can really take a lot longer when you're tantalizingly close, and by the way, like, you need to make money. We had to renegotiate with the landlord. There were a lot of delays. COVID caused a lot of delays. But we opened, and I found an incredible brewer who had been doing it for Vince Falcone. He'd been brewing for 30 years. And I was very clear that I was not going to be making the beer. And over the course of this, like I looked at what a lot of other breweries were doing and had done, and those that closed, why they did. And one of the first one was that I was not going to pretend in the slightest that, even though I was an accomplished home brewer, that I could run, we have a 20 barrel brew house and a 5 barrel brew house, that I could run anything like that. So I conceive of the beers and sort of have a flavor. I call myself a flavor professional, which makes my wife laugh, but we're all flavor professionals. That's what we do. We are.
Wait, isn't that what every Untapped user is? Flavor professional.
Flavor trolls, I think.
Flavor trolls, yes.
Is the different. Oh man, don't get me started on Untapped and Google. I just want to say this to all the people out there who are reviewing things. Like, there was a time when there were professional reviewers, and what a professional reviewer would do is that they were aware of their power, sometimes for the ill, but they would generally go to some place 2, 3, 4 times, and with the goal of getting like a considered picture of what was going on, understanding that any given night or day that something off could be happening, and if you could really mess with a company's fortunes if you give them a bad review.
Mm-hmm.
And with Google, people could just walk in and leave a review that millions of people see. You can't do anything about it. It's really crazy.
You don't have to prove that they actually went to the place or had the product. Like, there's no vetting, or
we don't go on. I don't pay for Untapped. Why? Because like, I've seen reviews of like beers with chocolate shreds in them that exploded, and I was like, well, the half ounce I could lick off the sharp, the shrapnel tasted good, It's before the blood started, and it's just five bottle caps. Like
Yep.
it's not So, but I tell them don't. I come from a theater family. I tell them don't read the reviews. I tell the brewers don't read the reviews. And
I want to get back to your brewer for a moment, because that's one of the things that I vividly remember from when we met you. You spoke very proudly about Vince. So I'm curious, what was it about Vince that made you know, he's the one?
So brewing is one of the things that attracted me to brewing is that it's 1,000-year-old human activity, and it's a body of knowledge that's passed on. And Vince Falcone has been brewing for 30 years. He was a musician, but never not a musician. But he supported his punk band in Ohio by brewing in Virginia and then driving home 8 hours to play in punk bands. And he talked about how when he started out, he was sleeping on malt bags just to learn so he could learn how to brew. And the ad that I put out for the brewery was very technical. I said, I wanted to make sure that people knew how to partigile, that they knew how to do a decoction mash, that they, that they were don't use lactose, that there's that there was a classically trained brewers were desired. And I think I told you, I got 5 applications from all guys who had been brewing for 25 years or more, and they had been aged out in the pandemic. Some places, had been fired essentially because they could have the younger brewers do the same thing for less. And with Vince, it was he's like a monk in a way. All his life is making beer, and brewing is brewers are a lot like chefs or actors, I think, as I was telling you, where, they rely on capital in order to be able to work their craft. You can't be a brewer just in your house. And generally it's a pretty expensive place that you're working. And, you go wherever it is that you can do that. And no matter what the story of his life is, no matter what was happening economically, and no matter what how unscrupulous, he worked for places where the owners burned a place down, he said, or, it was sort of in the breadth of time that he had learned how to, and been a brewer. That's all he had ever done and ever wanted to be. And there was just, I knew that kind of mindset was what I needed, but his depth of knowledge was unparalleled, because everyone I interviewed, and again, for people with lots of experience, I would ask them not only about the beer they wanted to make, but I would say, okay, because we tell stories with our beers. So I said, one of the test questions was, I'm interested in making a beer with chicory and wild rice. How would you approach that? Because this might happen. I might say, I'm interested in making a beer with this ingredient. What do we do? And one person knew where they could find the answer. Another one actually had a book with them of different ingredients and stuff and different techniques. Vince, his approach was from the fundamentals. Okay, well, he hadn't worked with chicory before. We said, okay, what does it do and what does it taste like? Okay, well, we would make a tea of it first and test it and see the concentrations, but we'd put it in cold, or there was just the way that he approached the making of it demonstrated that he was thinking on a chemical, biochemical, metallurgical, in agricultural, in terms of the ingredients, all of the things that are happening when you make beer, he is thinking about and has awareness and an understanding of the fundamentals of all of the layers that go into making beer. And he said to me, I have so much information in my head and nowhere to put it, which is a feeling that I sympathize with, as you might, you can talk a lot. Like and for me, the experience of making beer and what was so compelling about it was there's all this information, there's all this knowledge, there's just so much to learn and so many different like rabbit holes to dive into. And he just knew so much about not only how to make great beer, but what goes into making great beer, what you have to do. And he knew how to make every style there was. He worked on every kind of system there was. He's a real, people talk about master brewers. And I got applications from people who had been to Siebel and whatever, 5 years of experience. And I said, well, would you consider being an assistant brewer? I said, no, head brewer. Like a master brewer is Vince is a master brewer, and a master brewer is the captain of a ship. They know how to fix everything. They can drive the forklift. They can do everything in the brewery. And they understand how it all works. And they understand it, and they understand how to manage the different yeast strains and how to manage production and how to think about the rhythm and flow of ingredients and of process and packaging and what that means for the economics of the brewery. He'd been a part of so many breweries opening. And people like that are unfortunately, they're just not valued, I don't think, in this industry. I think I said to you guys, like, hire the old guys. That would be my mission. Hire the older guys. I'm 47. Vince is 57. And the stories he told me about what home brewers turned brewery owners have done and have made brewers like him do. He was joking. He said, like, I hate beersmith because it means that it's like everybody thinks that they can be, a head brewer. Everyone thinks that they can like run a brewery because they make recipes on beersmith. My analogy for it is like, they're talking about, like I'm funny with my friends, so like I'll be a comedian. Well, I think a lot of the brewing industry is like people say, hey, I'm funny at home to my friends. I'm going to buy a comedy club and put myself on every night.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah. And so, you get dangerous things happening. You get, just bad things that aren't good. And you demean the knowledge that like the true professionals and the work that the true professionals have. Vince was, I sort of joked that he was I called him my human trafficking candidate, because he had been, when I found him, he responded on Pro Brewer. He was in some tiny town in Delaware, a remote little town in Delaware. Because the places that he had been working, one closed after another during the pandemic, and like a lot of chefs and actors and brewers, he didn't have a lot of financial security. So someone who ran this brew pub in Delaware said, looking for a head brewer, come work in my brew pub. And Vince went up there and, to make the orange IPA, Vince said, all right, you want to make an orange IPA? And a million ways of doing it. We use orange peel is one good way of doing it. Or you can use orange puree if you want, just let me. And said, no, I know how, this is how I make it. Lactose and orange juice in the boil. So while we were making this transition, Vince sent me a photo saying, please promise me I never have to do this again. And it was these sacks of the brew deck with sacks of lactose and cases of cartons of orange juice that all had to be opened and dumped into the boil.
Wow.
There was like he showed up. He showed me his coveralls that were that were completely encrusted with hop matter because the owner had insisted on double dry hopping during fermentation and
Of course.
and high fermentation. Vince said, like, well, that's dangerous. But we have to be careful about that. There's nucleation points, and it's under pressure. Like, gotta be. You don't have to do that. Insisted on doing it, and the owner insisted on doing it to a point where Vince said, like, I'm quitting. I can't. This is dangerous. But he went back because he knew that the owner would make his assistant brewer do it. So Vince did it the way, and got showered in beer.
So what are some of the beers at City State? Perhaps some of the beers that maybe you brought to the table with your brewing history, and beers that Vince was really excited and passionate about to brew and serve at City State?
Well, yeah, let's work backwards. So I think you had, when you saw me at Queer Beer Festival, we had a Lux Lager.
Yes, which I love that beer. I have a 6-pack in my fridge.
Oh, wonderful. So, Vince said to me, I've been waiting for someone to make this for 25 years. I've been waiting for a brewery owner to let me make this beer for 25 years. So I said, okay, of course. It's a light lager. It's 4.5%. It's all malt. There's no corn. There's no rice. It's barley and wheat. And it has a fantastic depth of flavor. And, you can't call it light lager because that would trigger, you have to send it to a lab, but you can call it Lux. Hope no one from the TTP listening, but Lux in Latin means light. Thanks for the cola.
Nice.
So that was so that's Vince, definitely the light lager. He's from Ohio, so that Midwest repertoire, the cream ales and stuff that we use cream ales as a base for a lot of collaborations. It's a wonderful foundation for me. So I gave him all of my recipes when we started, and I said, here are my recipes. You can throw them all out. You can, but here are the names basically and the kind of beers I want them to be. And I said, but I have no ego attached to you using these recipes or not. Mm-hmm. And to my delight, my recipe for our Dunkelweizen, called Equal Marriage dark wheat beer, that survived pretty much intact. A recipe for a Maibach that we make called Self-Determinator also survived the translation process pretty much intact. Hops were never my strength as a brewer, so sort of my various attempts at like a flagship IPA, he quickly wrestled around into his immaculate West Coast style IPA. So those, I guess, to answer your question shortly, it's for my contribution, Equal Marriage Dark and Dunkelweizen and Self-Determinator Maibach were my contributions. And Vince knows how to make lots of things, but he was very excited about making Lux Lager, about making Equal Marriage Blonde, which is a Hefeweizen. He loves making Oktoberfest. He really geeks out on making the classic styles, but he's also had to learn how to make a hazy. Our hazy IPA is one of our biggest sellers, and he's not surprised. And that's hazy IPAs for a brewer that's been was trained 30 years ago, goes against everything that they were taught about making beer.
Yeah.
Everything. The way it's supposed to look, how the amount of particulates in it, the package, all of it. And so he's learned, and he's made a great one called Feather Duster.
Now, do you guys have any beers on that are sort of a nod to your time in Scotland, or perhaps your travels overseas, since the beer over there was such a huge part of you becoming passionate about beer?
Yeah, we have we're between batches now, but we have something called Train Spotter. It is we call it a pub ale. Technically it's an ordinary bitter. But unfortunately, while German beer and Belgian beer has a kind of cachet, I found this, at least as beer salesman, calling something an English ale, it people, it kind of turns people off a little bit. They think it's sort of old fashioned or fusty, but an ordinary bitter is different than an ESB or a mild. Train Spotter is an ordinary bitter. It's 4.5%, and we use it a single malt. Single hop beer. We use it to feature hops, and it sort of dovetails with Scotland a couple of different ways. So I'm sure you've heard of the movie Train Spotting, or right? So do you know what it is to be a train spotter? What that means? So a train.
I'm assuming it's not just spotting trains, since you're asking the question.
It is actually. So train spotters,
which is perfect because you guys are right on that's the red line, right
on the trail. So train spotters are birders, but for trains. So it is. It's a very obsessive hobby with a very obsessive, dedicated subculture, and train just basically like heroin addicts is the sort of connection in the book. And the movie came out when I was actually in college in Scotland. So we as you said, like our brewery overlooks a couple of different train tracks. We've got the elevated train going back and forth in DC, the metro, as well as we have Amtrak and MARC train, which is Maryland commuter rail, and freight trains going by. So you can have 3 trains going in different directions. So it's definitely a place to spot trains. And it's the only beer where we sort of name the hop, sort of above the fold. So it's for the hop nerds, the hop train spotters. So
the hop spotters.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So we used a Neo Mexicanus, a Medusa in one. We used Green Bullet in the first one, and that's British malt. Actually, we get all our malt now from Delaware, but it British yeast, and we use some British brewing sugars for our British style ales. We've also made an ESB, which there's always something British inflected on, because it's my favorite, but it's also for the mission of what we're trying to be, which is it's convivial. And so British ales are wonderful at getting a lot of flavor into, a lower alcohol package, something that's really kind of companionable. So that's why we always have one on.
Now, you brought up a lot the importance of representing the culture of DC in the brewery. So now that the brewery is open a year now, congratulations.
Thank you.
In what ways will people experience DC culture when they visit City State?
Well, we have on our one along our sort of main wall of the brewery, we have about 45 framed posters of one for almost every neighborhood in the city. And that's done actually by our label artist, whose studio is right around the corner. And it's very important for representation because there's, I think people can tell you around the country, can name you a neighborhood in Chicago or San Francisco or Boston, but we have a hard time naming a neighborhood in DC. So having the posters up there with these, street views that are not just the typical landmarks of DC, it really communicates to you what we're trying to do. So again, 45 of those portraits up. The experience of just coming to the brewery, you see, you can see the Capitol from where we are, but you can also, by coming on the Metropolitan Branch Trail, on the bike run pathway, on the metro, it's definitely an urban experience. We've got music going on all the time. It's generally, if it's not local radio, it's definitely, let's just put it this way, there's not a lot of bluegrass going on at the brewery. So it's generally jazz, funk in some way. You'll see a very diverse crowd, and that's something we're really proud of. We have we really have. I've always, since the early days of writing the business plan, always we had as our focus of wanting Black people as our customers. My first business plan writing in 2013, 2014, talked about the importance of diversity to the industry, kind of for the long haul, but also to be a representative DC brewer. You can't talk about DC history without talking about Black history. And so we wanted to make sure that we are an inviting place for everyone in the city, and not just something that would be just like a gentrifier's playground. You'll see cans. We've got cans that feature an icon in DC culture. His name Big G, Anwan Glover. Fans of The Wire will know him as Slim Charles. And he was a living legend 20 years ago, which is why they put him on the show. And he's the dean of DC's go-go music, which is DC's homegrown music and culture. So we have two cans with his face on it, a beer and a hard iced tea and lemonade, and he designed those beers. We have another collaboration with Sandlight, with the place called the Sandlot that we call Sandlight. It's our light lager, and they designed those cans, and there's Black folks on that can too. So I can say with some fair confidence that we're probably one of the only breweries in the country to have Black faces on our cans that are designed by Black people, and their participation in how the beer is made, and not just like slapping someone's face on it that may not be around or might not have had a participation in it. And then our activities, whether it's a trivia night or a comedy, there's always that sort of intellectual component of DC, and then of course the great food. We've got DC has an amazing food culture that's really grown a lot in the past 20 years. We have a place at the street called Mess Hall, which is a kitchen incubator. A lot of food trucks are based out of there. So we've got rotating food trucks and food vendors that are there almost every night.
And you guys have actually this coming weekend. Now, for our listeners, it will have already happened when you hear this. Sorry. But you guys are doing a For the Culture pop-up shop. So Can you tell us a little bit about that? And will this be a recurring event at the brewery?
Absolutely. Breweries are, City State, we're a venue and we're a platform. We have 5,000 square foot tap room. We've got, the whole facility is 15,000 square feet. And so there's so much of culture making that goes on right now, that it's gone on for, I guess, since at least the past 10, 15 years, because of that the internet has facilitated, of culture making that doesn't require a home, that doesn't require a brick and mortar. But that activity still needs places to gather. So, there's a lot of influencers and small businesses and lifestyle brands and so forth in DC. A lot of people looking to make their mark, and they can do that with an online store, with Instagram page, and occasionally with pop-ups in some places, and with markets that get organized around the city. So Pop of Culture puts on markets with different vendors. They're almost all Black owned, and they do that at venues all over the city. And so we're proud to host them and to turn the brewery kind of into a marketplace. We did that once before at the end of last year with Asian American Pacific Islander art collective. It was called Sorry Market. and it was a tremendous success. It was all different kinds of food and art and things to buy. And it was great. So, this will use the brewery to provide a space for entrepreneurs to sell and discover, meet new customers, for our customers to have a different experience. But to use what we've achieved to sort of to share the resources and elevate others, to try to grow the pie. We do that a lot in our approach to canning beer, to contracting. We're interested in talking to folks who have interest in bringing new beverages to market. And because we have a 5-barrel system and a 20-barrel system, they don't have to do 30 barrels at a time and have a huge amount of liquid to deal with. So we try in many different ways to use our business to elevate others, because we think it increases the pie for everybody.
I also want to mention you guys have skee ball, and I feel like there are other people out there that will be equally as excited as I was when I first walked in the brewery and saw skee ball. So kudos to that.
Yeah, that's
Thank
great.
you.
There was one other brewery we have been to, Steph. I've been with you too, that had skee ball. Do you remember?
Boardwalk Brewing.
Yes.
Boardwalk
Brewery
Brewing,
owners get skee ball. People love skee ball.
Skee ball's great.
It's great. I'm terrible at it. So if you have any tips, I'm from New York City. It's supposed to be like in my blood a little bit. I am really awful at it. Are you supposed to have a long backswing with your arm? I'm doing this as I'm talking to you. A long backswing with your arm, or is it just supposed to be, forward and like a flicker? Can y'all share some skee ball techniques?
For me, it's always finding the perfect position. Like, you can never be centered to the lane. I always usually have to be on an end one where there's not another lane next to me. Okay. And I bowl the same way. I always have to be like over, and like once you find the right position, and usually it's like the bend in my back, like I can't move. I literally, my entire body is in one stiff position except for my arm throwing the ball. And that's when I do the best. That's when I find the sweet spot for my body.
Sweet spot. Wow. Well, I was going to say, I specifically remember loving skee ball as a kid. And I know my strategy then was to just roll the ball as hard as possible and cause as much chaos as I possibly could. I can't say that I developed any more sophisticated of a strategy than that in adulthood. So I don't have any tips to give you. I'm sorry.
As long as you're having a good time, I feel like that's all that matters.
Just put a little English on it or something.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's like it's one of those things where it's like you think you're gonna have a good time, and then like you roll 3 of them in the 10 gutter, and then your score isn't going to be very good, but you got to kind of game league try. I don't know. It's people really go spend a long time. They'll get very competitive. So I recommend, and we have a league now that DC Frey comes in. They do skee ball and cornhole, which I'm even worse at cornhole. I definitely need some lessons in that department. Yeah, and I love games. So we've got pinball, and we have a game called Killer Queen, which is 5-on-5. 10 people can play for $1 total, and it's just this really crazy art game that, like art video game that has become a really strong sort of subculture of its own. We hosted a tournament last year. There's a whole competitive scene. There's like it's kind of a combination of joust and an acid trip. There's 3 ways to win. Either like your queen, you can kill the other queen 3 times, or all of your bears fill up your hive with berries, or you ride a snail.
So it's one of those games. You know the kind of game.
I don't know what to know. There's no other kind of game like that. It's really wild. So there's like, and there's 5 people on a side play each other, and people just start jumping up and down. It's great. At first, it's like, what is going on here? And then you get the hang of it, and then it really pulls you in. So we have all kinds of board games and we try to really, we have a screen up, we have a projection screen, but we don't have it on all the time. We really try to create a place where people can be themselves and not be bombarded by screens or by and people can sort of can make themselves at home in a way. Really trying to be what beer gardens were very much in this country and have been all over the world. In DC also, there used to be hundreds, like over 100 beer gardens at the turn of the last century. And they've always been gathering spaces where, people didn't get wasted, where they were family friendly. Like I don't understand this whole like kids in tap rooms, like who is this really something that people stress out about? Like we've got kids all over the place and parents are very grateful to have a place where I think parents often get treated less hospitably than like dog owners, to be honest.
I believe that, yeah.
We've got push toys and sidewalk chalk and parents show up at 11 o'clock on Saturday because they've been up for 5 hours already. And we give the kids goldfish and a juice box and and parents, we get a lot of family business that way because they're looking for a place to where they can sit and watch the kid and again just be convivial and be together. So we really commit to being a gathering place for everyone in the city. We haven't had to throw anyone out for being drunk. No one's gotten, we don't serve liquor. No one's vomited yet, in our stalls. We don't really serve anything over, I think 8% is the strongest thing we serve. That's historically should have been the mission of breweries, that it's a beer gardens. But, breweries are unique in being factories that people like visit and want to be at and have a connection to. Like you don't go to your favorite like paper factory and go hang out, right? No one goes and visits the factory that makes their favorite thing of an individual thing, right?
It depends if there's free samples at the end.
I guess free paper samples, sure. I mean,
free paper samples.
I mean, we live in Pennsylvania. There's like all the snacks are made up here. You can go visit all kinds of like pretzel factories, chocolate factories, chip factories, like
that's a good
Crayola
point.
factories.
You get free crayons at the Crayola factory too.
So I have a very, very deep place in my heart for Pennsylvania because when I worked in the Senate, it was for Senator Arlen Specter, but it was in the year and a half that he was a Democrat at the end of his career, and I joined his staff to try to pass a climate change bill. We got pretty close. But yeah, that Pennsylvania was the snack food capital of the world, also the specialty crop capital. So all of the apples and mushrooms and stuff. I learned a lot about Pennsylvania in that year and a half. But I didn't even think about that. So like you could go to the Utz factory and get some, and you can see them making it, and then you can like get some samples and stuff at the end. Or do you see the factory, or is it like like at Hershey where you get out into the factory? But
no, not everyone has a ride that you go through like Hershey.
Right. So you can actually go and see it.
Well, Hershey had to make a ride because they don't actually make the chocolate in Pennsylvania anymore. The chocolate's made in Mexico. So I feel like that's more of a distraction than a factory tour.
But for Utz, like if you go to, I would love to go to the Utz factory. So like you go to the Utz factory, can you watch them making stuff?
I am embarrassed to say I have never done the Utz tour.
What tours have you done? I never have.
The Hers one? Did you actually get to see them make the
Hers.
chips?
Yeah, and they actually gave you warm.
Fresh. At the Hers one, you get fresh off the line. Well, I've done the Coke factory tour, and that's obviously not in Pennsylvania. That's in Georgia.
Right.
But they give you a bottle of fresh Coke too to take with.
Oh wow! So I think that.
There's even a Turkey Hill World.
Oh yeah, I've been to the Turkey Hill experience.
You mean Breezewood, or it's different than that?
There's one in Columbia, Pennsylvania. It's the Turkey Hill Experience, and you
That's
can
what it's
just
called.
design your own ice cream.
Oh wow! Like God,
We just totally defunct your comment, by the way.
No, it's true. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad. I'm glad to have a counterexample. No, that's true. There are snack food places that you can go still, or you could go to the dairy at Penn State. That's kind of like visiting a factory.
Yeah, we have a lot of creameries in Pennsylvania.
I guess so. I was actually very fortunate to go and visit the actual factory floor, the Hershey factory floor, because my mother, I was like 8 years old, so early mid 80s. My mother worked on a book about Hershey, and so she got I think it's a great thing for parents to like think of your job as like a way to like create cool experiences for your kids. So we actually I got to go visit some cool places, some of the projects my mom did. And one of them was the Hershey factory. And so I weren't there for long, but it really was like really walking in. So like, the conveyor belts and things just whizzing everywhere. And then we went into because she was having some meetings, and at every floor in the Hershey like office building, there's like bowls of the individual candy. So I walked out of there with like my hat and everything bulging. But I really remember being on that floor. I don't think it's gone, right? Oh, it's gone. Making their slightly vomit flaated
slightly vomit flavor.
Yeah, go read an article. I forget where the article is about what chocolate is used in Hershey now, and they have to do but it has some butyric acid in it, which which is kind of what makes vomit smell. Butyric acid is a flaw you get in beer. You can get it, and it's like slightly vomit.
Is that like the Parmesan cheese smell?
No, it smells like baby vomit.
Oh, okay.
It smells like baby vomit. Yeah. So there's butyric in the strain of cocoa that has been developed, like that's hardy enough that they can, and that grows enough for them to. For the American climate and everything else, basically it has it's kind of like Hershey's chocolate is a little bit like a double dry hopped IPA. There's something there. There's a flavor they're trying to cover up in there somewhere often.
Hershey's chocolate. It's like a double dry hopped IPA.
Yeah, it's covering up flaws with with chocolate. There's a lot of beers out there. Sorry.
There's
sorry other brewers.
The Yingling Hershey's chocolate porter everybody's raving about, not like a couple of years ago now, I guess. And I thought it was gross. I didn't think it tasted like vomit, but it definitely tasted like metal, almost like copper.
Yeah, food does not belong in beer. I just we have some style rules at the brewery, and our style rules are no lactose, no processed food products. So no chocolate chips or hamburger buns. Like we use coffee and tea are okay, and like culinary herbs.
Yeah,
but
when you get into the whole hamburgers and the mash and thing like that's, or the orange juice you were talking about earlier, that's more to get like the headlines than to make a good beer. Be like, oh, we made this with 100 pounds of this weird thing, and
and it sells, but it misses kind of the whole point to me of brewing, which is you can create flavors, you can evoke them. Our equal marriage dark wheat, it tastes like chocolate and coffee, but there's no chocolate or coffee in it. People swear there is, right? Mm-hmm. Our blonde wheat, we call it banana champagne because like the banana note in it is strong. So people want a fruity beer. You can make a fruity beer without actually having any fruit in it.
Yeah, people forget that yeast and malt can produce these things,
right?
Without having to add other non-Reinheitsgebot ingredients.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's
I used to work at a cafe. We sold La Colombe coffee, and they always put like not tasting notes, but they'll put 3 flavors that you'll get from the coffee, whether that's hazelnut, whatever. But it's just based on, the compounds in the coffee that evoke those flavors. But people would always ask, like, oh, is there hazelnut in here? Oh, I didn't know there was chocolate in this. And like, no, there's not actually that in there.
So tell me enough about me. Tell me about y'all. What got you doing a brewing podcast, and how long has it been going for, and what motivates you to keep doing it?
Well,
This coming March actually will be 10 years since we recorded the first episode.
Mazel
Yep.
tov.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Yes.
So Dan and I are actually the ones that started the podcast. Dan has a degree in radio broadcasting from Temple, and he, did some radio gigs and kind of had the idea to do a podcast just to kind of get something, out there using his skills. And at the time, I had been homebrewing for a bit, and I had applied to the American Brewers Guild, which I since have done and graduated and did the internship, because I had the crazy notion that I was going to open my own brewery, which didn't happen, thank God. And so he was like, well, you know a lot about beer, and I like to drink beer, and I want to do this radio thing. What if we do a podcast? And Wayne has like a graphic design background and is really good with techie shit. And we're like, hey, will you design us a logo? And do you want to be our guest on our second episode? And he never left. And Wayne and Dan are brothers, and I'm their cousin. So we've literally known each other our entire lives. So we sort of naturally banter, and it sort of comes naturally without trying too hard because we've known each other for so long. But yeah, and somehow it's been almost 10 years.
10 years. Yeah. And I think another big part of it is that we don't do this like we have an LLC, but we don't really treat it like a business. Like we're not, trying to chase profits or whatever, or trying to build a brand or, we've always just focused on, we're just going to do it for fun, and we're going to do what we think is fun with it. And we're not like, we all have full-time jobs. We all do other things to support ourselves. And I think that helps, because it takes off a lot of pressure, because there's not pressure to perform. There's not pressure to, have a good marketing report this quarter or whatever. And that makes it a lot easier. And it's a lot more about the conversation and the experience of just learn. I mean, when we started the podcast, I had only just started exploring craft beer. I was like, I think I like hoppy beers, and I don't really know what that means. Like that's where I was at 10 years ago. And so just, through meeting and talking to people and getting a lot of osmosis knowledge from Steph along the way. I think, as someone who's just naturally curious, it's just the ability to keep learning more and more about it has kept me going.
Why do you think?
I think our talents balance each other. We all naturally take on a different important role when it comes to the podcast. And we all have a mutual understanding that when it's not fun anymore, that's when we're going to stop doing it. When COVID came around, like that was really hard because we always recorded in person. We would pack everything up, set up at the brewery. And, that was amazing, connecting with people and spending time with people, many times spending hours at the brewery, hanging out after recording. So when that disappeared, it was sort of like, is this still fun anymore? But we've been able to connect with people not in our geographic region. I'm in Norfolk, Virginia right now recording. Like, who would have thought I could record a podcast episode 6 hours from home? But, because of Zoom, we can do this. But I think with all of the important topics that have come up in our lives too, we've become very purposeful with who we talk to on the show, and we don't just invite anyone to be guests anymore. We're looking for people that are making a positive impact in the brewing world, whether it is through like diversity is a big thing for us, featuring breweries that diversity and inclusion is important to them. So I think having that new lens has sort of brought us new life and is making it fun again, but in a different way than it was pre-COVID.
Why do you think your brewers, your listeners, tune in and have been tuning in for 10 years? Like, does our industry still culturally relevant? Does it have, interesting things to say? I mean, these are questions I ask myself a lot. I really don't like the term craft beer. I think it's actually become sort of exclusionary and too narrow, for what we're trying to do. We're trying to be a cultural institution and make culture, and be a place where culture is created, not just ourselves, but a venue and for others in the city. Now, I went to I think Cezanne portrait exhibit in DC, and there's a small portrait that Cezanne had done, and it was accompanied by the caption like, when this was exhibited at the expo, pregnant women were warned not to look into the portrait because of the violent emotions that were contained there. And there used to be sensations caused by new paintings, and people rioted at Stravinsky's like Rite of Spring. Like, do the conversations, the aesthetic conversations that and the cultural conversations that happen in the brewing industry, like, do they matter to the culture at large? Do they and to our society? I ask myself that question a lot. I wonder what you all think of that, and why you think, what your listeners are tuning in for every week.
Well, I have two answers. We do have a lot of listeners that are in the industry. A lot of industry people, will put us on during a brew day and listen. And, I think it's one way to stay connected to other people in the industry and hear what other people are doing. But I also
put down the lactose, whoever you are, right now. Just put it down. Put down the chocolate. Try some chocolate.
But I also think that for people that are listening that just are beer enthusiasts, perhaps, craft beer is not just something to get you drunk or just a beverage you order at dinner. Like, it's bigger to a lot of craft beer drinkers. And I think knowing the story behind, whether it's a beer or the story behind a brewery or a brand, I think gives even deeper meaning. And there's always like the norm feeling. Like, people want to walk into a bar or a brewery and feel like norm. They want to feel like everybody knows me here. The brewer knows me, or the owner knows me, or remembers me. And, I think it makes you feel like you're building a relationship, or I don't know how to put it into words, but it makes you feel like you know them. It just gives that feeling, and connection. That's like the word that I'm looking for. I think it gives that connection, and just the story behind the brewery or the beer, and feel that connection.
Yeah, I remember somebody said at some point, and I think we've quoted them a couple times because it was a pretty flattering quote, but they said that we show the people behind the beer, and that's like what the unique thing that we bring as a beer podcast, because I don't listen to a lot of beer podcasts, but I imagine there's a lot of like just technically, talking about the brewing process or like dissecting, really in-depth tastings, and that, that's all well and good, but you're still just talking about a product. You're not talking about the people, and I think that's what people gravitate towards us, because they're, they go to this brewery, maybe all the time, or they're huge beer nerds, and they've heard of like, all these big breweries, but they have no idea who the brewer is. They have no idea. They don't, in many cases don't know what their name is, or don't know who the owner is, or, the story behind the business, or the story behind the beer that they really like. So I think that's the personal sort of angle is what makes us unique. And I think as far as beer in larger culture, I mean, I don't know about like artistically, but at least socially, I think, and as Steph said, like, we've been very deliberate about our guests we've had on, and just everything we've done in the past, I'd say like year or so, trying to focus more on being intentional and promoting things that we think are important, even beyond beer. And I think in doing that, maybe we have a warped perspective of the industry because we're seeking that out. But I think it has been pretty apparent that, the beer industry is an industry that is full of people who are willing to be activists. It's full of people who are willing to invest in communities, that are willing to not just, run a business and make a dollar. Like, they want to do something more. They want, all the things you've been talking about, a sense of community, a safe space for people, a diverse space, a space where people can come together and talk. And, it's based on this ancient beverage that people have been gathering and talking around, since before recorded history. And so I think that still exists. And, there's been controversy in the beer industry, and there's, controversy everywhere if you look for it. But I think the response from the beer industry has been very telling as to the character that exists overall. And I think that is largely a good character, and a character that's willing to do the work to make the world a better place, even if they're just making beer,
Well, I appreciate, thank you. And I appreciate sort of making the cut. It shows that I'm doing something right, and the message we're trying to get across. And I think you're right. That I think a lot of brewery owners or brewery folks get into it because it is like being part of an artistic troupe. It's a creative activity every day, and making something that communicates with people and creates culture. I've been really struck by. I've never owned a business before, and I've been struck by how much of a abuse people in this industry have gone through, and how hard people are willing to work because of of how dedicated they are to wanting to. They can't be anywhere else. This is brewing. Being in the brewing industry is what they want. There's no substitute for it. And I've had multiple my employees say to me, like, I've never had a boss that cared whether we were happy or not. To hear Vince talk about that he wanted to make this beer for 25 years, to hear like the things that he's had to do because owners were, the margins aren't always great, and like owners were willing to basically treated the brewery staff as expendable, which is throughout the service industry. Remember, that's the part of the reckoning of COVID and everything else. But this is an industry where people that's very physically demanding, right? That is made up of, for whatever our high-minded ideals, it depends on people with hand trucks delivering heavy things, often down sadistically designed stairs, like the deliveries that people have to make in the city and other places is insane. It's like the last thing that any restaurant owner thinks about is like how people are gonna have to deliver something. It's like, oh well, whatever, they have to go down the stairs. Like, they'll do it because they'll want to sell us the beer, and I worked at the distributor I worked at. Turnover in the warehouses are high. People are they're working at night. It's very physically hard work, and the guys and gals in the warehouse and driving the trucks, like, they don't get to go on incentive trips to Belgium, right?
Yeah.
Like what? This is not to demean anything about what was going on with founders, but when that all came out, part of me said, like, who do you think is? Like, do we think that everybody who has a hand in delivering beer has a coastal, has a more liberal mentality? Like, think about the amount of people that go, and the kind of people across all economic strata that go into making and delivering beer. There's just stuff that kind of comes up to the surface. But this is an industry that depends on people working really, really physically hard and often not getting paid very much. And not necessarily like with an education, depending on where you are.
Mhm.
And there's this sort of sheen over it of and it was for a while of a high-minded cultural product, which it is. And there's a lot of knowledge and art and resources and stuff into making it, but everything that's involved in making it and delivering it is as blue collar as it gets.
Yeah.
And but the kind of blue collar where it's people are sort of more is demanded of them because, like, hey, you get to work somewhere cool like a brewery.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that happened in the restaurant industry too. That happens in the restaurant industry too, where people are just, it's a sadistic, can be a sadistic and a masochistic culture. And when you get to be the manager, then you treat people like shit all the way down. And where are you going to go?
Mhm.
People work in this industry because they don't fit into an office. Because they're musicians. I mean, I'm the first person in my family, in my dad's line, that's not a musician, and a couple of generations. All the production staff are all musicians. Vince a musician. Eric Dollinger, my lead brewer, is a musician, and Nate Bullington's like cellarman, also a musician. And so it provides a haven for people who have a more idiosyncratic or and need a more flexible approach to just sort of their professional life.
Yeah.
And it also leaves them, I think, really vulnerable to exploitation.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we've definitely talked to a lot of brewery owners who have said, I started a brewery because I couldn't do the office job, I couldn't do the corporate world and all that. But not everybody's the brewery owner. Some people are the people delivering the beer. Some of the people are, as you say, those who don't necessarily fit in other more traditional workspaces. And I think we're starting to see more of an appreciation for everyone from the top to the bottom of that food chain, and hopefully that only continues moving forward. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but the brewery owner who had, like me, who then this is the place that they start. Well, then you have to take responsibility for being the leader.
Yeah.
And for you may not have been great in an office environment, but now you're the boss, and you have to create some sort of you have to create a good working environment for everyone else around you. And I just think there's a lot of there's a lot of because kind of you don't need a degree to open a brewery, you can just do it. That there's and you can make the beer sort of however you want, right? You can make whatever beer you want. You have hops from all over the world, grain from all over the world, yeast, whatever you want. So most people's choices are really constrained. Like what someone makes is really only constrained by their choice.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wouldn't have gotten into this business if I didn't think there was room for more thoughtfulness and professionalism in the industry. And I really think there is, in terms of what gets turned out, these like exploding beers. And I've joked around with accounts, like, I'll say, well, you've got cooler space. Like, can we get the beer into the cooler? And they'll say, well, no, we need to keep those for like the fruited sours because, they might explode. And I'll say, well, hey, our beer explodes. You got to keep it cold. Our Pilsner, it's a bomb, right? Got to keep it cold. Right? That we have this like that's something really that the industry, like, it's these slushy beers and all. Like, what are we giving to people? So then they're going to put it in their bodies. Like, we're giving this to people.
You're going to put it into their bodies.
Yeah, we're making something like, here, consume this.
Yeah. And but I we've talked ad nauseum about that sort of thing on this podcast, and I think that is another thing. As people are being more conscientious about where they spend their money and what products they consume, and people are paying more attention to, as you say, the guy delivering the beer as much as the guy making it.
Yeah.
I think there's also a sort of a burgeoning sort of appreciation for more traditional approaches to brewing also happening, and more appreciation and sort of a backlash against all the like stunty experimental beers that have sort of dominated conversations for quite a while now.
Yeah. I'm all
but-
for experimentation and stuff, but
Yeah, but
yeah, there's a
with a
reason.
purpose. With a
Yeah,
purpose.
there's a reason. I said, like, hire the old guys, old ladies,
Yeah.
old women, whoever. Hire the people with experience. Like I remember when I was a rep, hearing a presentation where someone said very proudly, like, "There's no one in our brewery over the age of 40." And they were like, I was over 40 at that point, so I didn't say that. But it's just like, it's like very, like, I think in our country we've gotten it, coming from like climate change and like the devaluation of expertise and the sort of scoffing at expertise and experience, and the substitution for just like vibes for expertise. There's a reason why there's such a body of knowledge in brewing for so long, and you can't just. I think we lose a lot, and we're in danger of losing a lot. Like Vince, our brewery comes from he knows the guys who ended up starting Stone. Like, the breweries that were here, they're in the Mid-Atlantic. Mid-Atlantic is a very rich history and sort of helping the American brewery, being a part of the American brewery industry, get started. And the people who started the breweries 30, 35 years ago, the thing they had to figure out, like the yeast the stories about them getting yeast. You get like a crystal vial of yeast from Weisswein in Germany, and then you had to grow it up yourself, and all the things that they had to do and learn and teach others to make the industry what it is. And then like the next generation's response is, well, we'll just plug it into Beersmith. Like, Vince can do, and he can do a recipe in his head and know what the Play-Doh is going to be, because he understands how it all, the proportions and everything works together. And I think we're really in danger of losing something valuable and being able to transmit something valuable if we just sort of disdain all of that, or pigeonhole it into something that's just sort of like a curiosity. I'll just like one last, like I saw once a manual that a brewery released for their fruited sour, like their fruited lactose sour, like how SOP. It talked about their in-house ice cream treatment and whatever. And it was like reading, and because of the amount of like gushing red fruit everywhere in the photos and stuff, like it read aesthetically, and it was like reading a manual for like how to murder somebody and dig it up. Like it was like the most transgressive document I've ever read, because it was like all the things like go around making beer. Like it was all of that. The beer is just a base for this like slushy thing that they were doing, but they had developed a practice around it.
Wow.
And that's this is like how it was done. And I I don't want to be like an old like fuddy-duddy about it, but I think this like qualitative and like objective differences about like what we're doing and what we're trying to communicate and to perpetuate this business. Like those of us, people who like, got into, what would it have been like if people were in their like mid-20s or early 20s and were interested in something other to drink other than Bud Light, and they talked to that, older friend or went along to it. And instead of the story that, I think a lot of people will tell, so, and then I had a Sierra Nevada for the first time. And, then someone handed me an Ninkasi, or, I had, instead of that, now the experience is, yeah, well, somebody just gave me a hard seltzer. Yeah, I was looking for something more interesting than Bud Light, and then someone gave me a slush bomb. Does that do those people? Is this industry just counting on like, oh, they'll find their way back to real beer eventually? Well, really? Will they? Or will that taste maybe not develop?
Yeah,
And
that's
then
an interesting question I hadn't really thought of. Yeah, when you think about when we all got started in craft beer, the things that we were exposed to that kind of started our journey are very different than what people are exposed to now who are starting that journey. Yeah. And while I do think that's an amazing conversation, we could talk about that for another 3 hours, I believe. I think we have to kind of make our way into the home stretch here. So James, if people want to find City State Brewing on the internet, where should they go? What social media should they follow?
We are on Twitter at City State Beer, and we are on Instagram as City State Brewing. Our website is citystatebrewing.com, citystatebrewing.com. But Twitter, Instagram, very little on Facebook, and we're dipping our toes into TikTok. But I would say, hey, you got to go where people are. We are doing the same thing. I have no idea how to consume it, but we have a PR team, and videos. You got everything's got until Instagram changes the algorithm again, and then we'll all be doing whatever the algorithm is. So like if the next algorithm is, hey, it's videos of people standing on their head motionless for 3 minutes. That's what's going to the top. Like that's what we'll all be doing. But and just Twitter at City State Beer and Instagram at City State Brewing.
Awesome. And I know this is normally the portion of the podcast where we rattle off all our socials like we did at the beginning, but I think if you've listened to this far, if you listen to the end of it, of all of our episodes, you probably do follow us on the social media. If you don't, just type Beer Busters into Google, you will find us. But I think that does unfortunately bring us to the end. I don't have the outro music to cue. Usually there's a piano thing that plays and it's got like 45 seconds and we know how much longer we have to talk until it ends, but I don't have that. But I will say the words and Dan can put it in post. This unfortunately brings us to the end. Boom, there it is, to another episode of Beer Busters. James, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit down. Sorry, we had a little bit of scheduling conflicts, but we made it happen and it was well worth the wait. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for letting me talk everybody's ear off. And I am really, really very proud after many years of work to be a part of this industry. So those of you out in the brew day today listening to this, I hope you're having a great day and you're feeling good and you're having a pleasant day with your coworkers and the beer turns out great, and just God bless all of us, man. We work really hard for something that we love, and we transmit that love to everybody. So lots of love out there to the brewing industry.
Very good. That was probably one of my favorite closing statements we've had on the podcast. I think everybody listening will appreciate that sentiment. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Dan at this point says I'm Dan Baker, but I'm not Dan Baker. I'm Wayne Baker. I'm still joined by my co-host and brewologist,
Steph Effner.
Did we say that at the end? I don't even remember anymore.
I think the outro music ended like 40 seconds ago.
Probably, but fine. Since it's not actually playing, we don't have to rush through. But no squids were harmed in the making of this episode. Once again, James, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening. And it feels weird ending it without the music. So I guess we'll see you next time. And for Christ's sake, put down the lactose.
Come see us in DC. Thank you all.
There you go.